So hello there guys, and welcome back to a brand new episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. I hope you are well. I certainly am. It's been a nice little week off, a great little break, but we're back and we're going to get ready to preview the British Grand Prix as F1 comes back home once again. And what an exciting weekend that we have in store. So many stories to look forward to this weekend. And of course, one or two things that we do have to talk about that should not be ignored that have come to light at the point of recording. But before we get into that, just a quick thank you to all of you guys that have recently joined the DNF1 family. We're so eternally grateful for your ongoing support, and we really appreciate it if you can keep following us on our journey going forward. Joining us on the panel for this British Grand Prix review, we've got Courtney Pine joining me once again. Courtney, how are you doing? You okay?
Hello, everyone. Yeah, going well. We've certainly got a lot to discuss, haven't we? It's been not only obviously is it British Grand Prix week, but once again, topics of conversation are coming up time and time again that definitely needs to be addressed.
Yeah, absolutely right. And joining us on this episode, a very special guest indeed that came on the show back in the Australian Grand Prix when the championship certainly looked a lot different than it does currently right now. And I'm really interested to get on his thoughts for the hot topics and this weekend's action, of course. It's F1 journalist Ben Hunt. Ben, first of all, thank you for coming back on the show. Really glad to have you on. How are you doing?
No problem. Yeah, I'm good, thank you. I was intrigued by you saying have a week off. We had Goodwood. I've moved to Goodwood, and it was a mega busy weekend for me, but fun nonetheless. It's festival speed is fantastic. I urge anyone to go if they've never been. Really good fun. Really good fun.
Yeah, I must admit I was quite jealous at seeing all of the pics of everyone enjoying themselves at Goodwood. I really wanted to go this year, but just by chance, me and my girlfriend accidentally not accidentally, we booked ourselves a week away in Malta, and I wasn't missing it too much, I'll be honest with you. I was seeing it on social media, it was nice, but I was sitting on the lounge having a nice drink and that overlooking the Mediterranean Sea. So it's all good in that regard. But but guys, of course, enough making people feel jealous about not going to Goodwood or Malta in particular. Let's get into the hot topics. And of course, quite a difficult one to talk about, but I think one that we would all agree we should really talk about on this episode were comments that were made by three-time world champion Nelson Piquet regarding Lewis Hamilton. And Nelson himself has been publicly condemned by some for comments that he made in an interview late 2021 about Sir Lewis Hamilton. And obviously, I'm not going to repeat for obvious reasons what these comments were. Hamilton's Mercedes team have spoken out on this, along with a few other teams and drivers at the time of recording, and the FIA and F1 have also spoken out. But most importantly, Sir Lewis Hamilton has made his feelings public on this matter, referring to the racial comments that Nelson Piquet had made against him. I'm just going to read the quote now, if I may. And he says, "It's more than language. These archaic mindsets need to change and have no place in our sport. I've been surrounded by these attitudes and targeted my whole life. There have been plenty of time to learn. Time has come for action." Now, guys, these are in reference to the comments that were made against Lewis Hamilton by Nelson Piquet. Disgusting comments, I think we would all agree. But first of all, Ben, I want to get your thoughts on this one, because I think one of the difficult things to sort of unpick from these comments that were made was that there have been some that have obviously outlined it as out-and-out racism. One or two others have argued that the comments that were made, or the word that was used in particular, when spoken in the context of the native language of Portuguese, it's not intended to be offensive. Given the context in which that word was used and what was being said, do you think that's a valid viewpoint to take on this one?
No, I don't, because I'll be honest with you, I saw the quotes come through. I was a little bit hesitant because it's obviously not in a language that I understand. I don't understand Portuguese, so like all good journalists, you phone up people who do understand Portuguese. And a good friend of mine was saying how the term that was used is usually associated with old people. It's obviously a term which they use, but still, nonetheless, they know that it's connotations. They know the fact that you can't use it. So, unfortunately, for all those people saying, oh, he didn't know, or it means something different in Portuguese. Well, sorry, I don't buy it. I think that he knew exactly what he was saying. And even if he didn't, he knew that that particular word has connotations. It has connotations around the world. We all understand it. He hasn't apologised, as far as I'm aware, just yet. So, as far as I'm concerned, we shouldn't be tolerating this sort of behaviour, this sort of attitude. F1 are right to come out and say that they disapprove of it. As Lewis said, I think the key part of his message is a couple of things. He's almost saying that, thankfully now you can all see the sort of abuse that I've had to put up with, which no one else has sort of been able to be aware of. Someone asked me how he would be feeling earlier on, and I said, well, he's probably relieved. Now, I know that seems like a silly thing to say, but he's probably relieved in the sense that now this is so obvious, this is so out there, the rest of the world can now actually identify with the experiences which he's had in the past. If someone says something face to face, or he hears about something, that's one thing, but being actually said in public in this particular way and using that particular word and in the manner of which it's associated, we can all now see it's clear. There's no hiding place. It's wrong. So I think that's part of it. The second part of his statement there is it's time to act. Now, that's quite pointed in my opinion. I think that's very much directed at F1. We've been racing under this slogan since 2020. And I've done a piece on it in tomorrow's paper, but it's about how, they need to stand up to this "We Race as One" slogan, which is only a hashtag. It had great meaning, great purpose, and it should be a great thing. But unless they act, unless they actually do something, it's all very well putting out a statement and saying, we disapprove of this, etc., etc. Unless you actually take action, then it's actually meaningless. It just becomes a hashtag, a trendy hashtag, when in actual fact they have the opportunity now to actually make a statement, to make a positive step, to say this sort of stuff's not tolerated. Going forward, anyone using this sort of language will not be welcome in F1. And that's the sort of tough stance which they've got to take. And I think that's where Lewis is at. We've got to take action. He wants to see action. He doesn't really want to see these words, oh, we disapprove. Everyone disapproves. It's saying nothing. But if you act and actually do something, that's what he wants to see.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with that entirely. I mean, what did you make of the comments that the FIA and F1 made? Because, of course, one thing that is quite telling about this is that they don't, for obvious reasons. I mean, I'm not too familiar with the legal implications of publicly condemning Nelson Piquet, whilst the comments themselves obviously infer that this is what they're talking about. But what did you make of their statements? Do you feel like it's one of those where they are going to consider taking action or perhaps taking this seriously? Or do you feel that perhaps, as you've already mentioned, that this could be yet another scenario where racism and abuse has occurred and yet they're just hoping that this might blow over and we just carry on until the next one happens?
I don't know, because those statements were so woolly that there was no indication from them per se that there would be strong action. Since then, there's been a suggestion that the F1 will look at banning and handing out a lifetime ban, which is obviously a step in the right direction, and that sends the right message. That's the sort of positive action that I think we need to see. But in terms of statements, I mean, you have to be seen to be saying the right thing. But as we all know, it's not about what you say, it's about what you do. And of course, that's what we need to see now.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think I was really impressed by Sir Lewis Hamilton's response for this, because I'm sure there would have been some people, not naming names in particular, that wouldn't have been too bothered by seeing Lewis potentially having a bit of a tit for tat with Nelson Piquet over this, or a war of words with him. I think a lot of people that have followed Lewis Hamilton and know his character from what they've seen know that that's not the sort of person that he is. He's not interested in engaging in something quite petty. He wants to tackle the bigger issue, one that we're seeing right now. So, Courtney, what did you make of Lewis's response? Do you agree with, obviously, points that Ben's already made here and a few others, that Lewis has rightfully elevated this to be a more serious issue, that the time for talking has stopped, the time for learning has stopped, we need to take action now and deal with it, otherwise this could become a more regular thing?
Absolutely. I think the reaction to this sets a precedent of actually the everyday lives that we live. Because I know for a fact, I can talk through personal experiences. I have seen older white men make derogatory remarks about people from other races, and then I've seen other people say, "Oh, that's just them; they're old school." And I feel that Nelson Piquet's some of the reactions by some of the people is an example of this. I feel that when people say, "Oh, they're just old school; they're just old men; they don't know any better," I think that's just a lazy way of brushing it underneath the carpet. And the reaction to Nelson Piquet, because it'll be so high profile, it should hopefully set a precedent to how actually people behave in the everyday lives that we live.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And obviously, Ben, I read a couple of your pieces this week. One in particular, obviously, was some comments made by Sir Jackie Stewart regarding Lewis Hamilton in his future in the sport. Obviously not ones of a racial context, it must be stressed, but it's certain views and values, perhaps older, archaic mindsets and attitudes that Lewis has obviously referred to that can inspire these negative connotations of him and obviously of other people of colour as well. Do you feel that that could possibly be seen as an issue, a cynical issue of F1, and it's a older archaic days that's been referred to that really needs to be dealt with? Because there is a risk right now that, as I said already, if this is not dealt with and action is not taken, as you mentioned, a lifetime ban could be something that could be seen as a statement of intent, that F1 could just allow this to continue and perhaps become the norm, unfortunately.
Yeah, this is it. With regards to the other two, it was Bernie Ecclestone and Sir Jackie Stewart. I just think that sometimes too much airtime is given to them, and they use it as an opportunity to knock Lewis for whatever reason they have. I think yes, there is a danger. As I mentioned before, if F1 doesn't take action, and getting back to Courtney's point about, oh yeah, that's it. That's just because they're old and that's just the way it was and everything. He's right. That sort of stuff does exist, and I've heard that myself. As an excuse. The issue I've got with people saying that is, and I'm bringing you onto another case here of Yuri Vips, which I'm sure we would have touched on. He's 21. This guy isn't old. This guy is young. He should know better. He's had the education and the privilege upbringing and everything else. He should know better than to use that same word, which obviously has been associated with Nelson Piquet. So it's not just old people, it's young people as well. And again, I don't know whether it's education. Perhaps it is. Perhaps it's penalties, in the sense of what's happened to him. He's been kicked out at Red Bull, now runs the risk of not having a racing career in the future. So that is like the ultimate penalty, if you like, as a racing driver, to have that opportunity taken away from you. And that's the sort of stance that we need to see, maybe, for people not to do that in the future.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, I should stress before we move on that obviously the comment I just made before that, I'm not implying or not suggesting that what Sir Jackie and what Bernie said was racist, but obviously there have been controversial comments made directed at Lewis Hamilton that may have inferences or connotations surrounded in those older views that really don't have a place in modern day Formula One or even modern society for that matter as well. But and I do recommend people check that article out, by the way, Ben. Obviously, I've got to plug that too, because it was a really, really good piece. And I will leave a link in the description for that one as well. And if you're watching this on YouTube, of course. But on the subject of Yuri Vips, obviously the comments that he did made, obviously it was, horrible, disgusted. And despite some people saying, oh, that's not, a testament to his character, the fact is he said what he said, and Red Bull have issued a punishment. Obviously, they didn't issue, at the time of recording this, a statement in support of Lewis Hamilton directly, but they did issue out a statement today to say that Yuri Vips' contract with the team as their test and development driver had been terminated. I'm expecting High Tech, the team that he drives for in Formula 2, to do something similar regarding his drive there, because I don't think Red Bull can actually say he's not with them anymore. I think that's up to them to deal with. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that was the right decision and action in this example was taken?
Yeah, I do. I think Red Bull deserve credit for acting in that swift manner and doing it in the way they did. Getting back to your point about whether they should or shouldn't say anything on the other row, That's entirely up to the team. I don't think that you should force people to make comments. They'd probably say, well, it's nothing to do with us. I think that you'll see drivers individually come out, and I think Daniel Ricciardo's done one and George has done one, posts on social media to say, I stand with Lewis. I think we'll see that, but I'm not necessarily sure whether we'll see other teams other than Mercedes coming out and voicing their support for him. I would like to see some more, but I just don't necessarily know if that is going to be the case. And I don't think Red Bull should be vilified for that in this instance.
Yeah, I mean, we do have to be careful with connections that can be drawn here because, of course, for those of you who do not know, Nelson Piquet is the father of Max Verstappen's girlfriend who drives at Red Bull, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to make a suggestion or an implication that, this is bad on Max Verstappen or bad on Kelly Piquet, for example, owing to the actions of Nelson Piquet, which of course I think we can all agree is wrong, but you can understand why some people would make those connections. Courtney, on those comments as well, obviously Ben's mentioned a really good point about should we be expecting everyone to show support. As I said, I think the key point here is what Lewis has already raised, is that it's not necessarily about people just coming forward to show support on a social media platform or verbally and then just repeat the process every time one of these things happen. Action needs to happen. And
exactly.
Would you also agree with obviously what we've been talking about? Obviously, Hamilton has obviously got the Hamilton Commission, and obviously that report's going to come out to try and investigate as to why more black people aren't involved in motorsport. Is it important that when these things do come to light, that the FIA and F1 do need to take this seriously, rather than do what some people may fear they may do, is just acknowledge it, read a few pages and think, okay, that's great, and then just carry on with the status quo?
Yeah, exactly. I think whenever something negative happens, you always have to turn into positive by learning lessons from it and improving as people from it. But in terms of the Red Bull and Max Verstappen issue, I do feel that there are some wounds from last season that will be reopened from this. I think Max Verstappen in particular will be getting a lot of grief, whether it be right or wrong. I think the reaction he gets at Silverstone will be interesting. Mm-hmm. I just feel that I hope I'm wrong. I thought that last year could have been behind us, but the connections will be made. I think we've all seen how social media works. And I just think, look, lessons need to be learned from it. But I think the PR around Red Bull recently hasn't been great. I think we saw the comments from Jos Verstappen, and now we're seeing comments from Nelson Piquet. I just feel that someone needs to have a word with these people just to, shush, basically, because whether it be right or wrong, the comments by the likes of Jos and Nelson Piquet are going to have an indirect consequences for Max, whether that be right or wrong.
I can tell you've never spoken to either Jos or Helmut Marko for that.
I'm glad I haven't, to be honest.
I tell you what, that would make a really, obviously not to joke about this because it's not, but it would make a quite interesting series if someone like Dr. Helmut Marko, if he just had like microphones around his house like Big Brother used to be, just to get his thoughts, because he always seems to have something to say, this guy. I don't know if it's because of the people that he speaks to. I know Dutch media tend to be quite bullish about...
I mean, do you remember during the middle of the pandemic, or at the start of the pandemic, he was suggesting a Corona camp where the drivers all went to, and they all caught COVID straight away, and then they were able to race. And he's full of ideas like that. And we shouldn't detract from the serious nature of what we're talking about. But he certainly does come up with some stuff, which is very out there.
Yeah, he certainly does. It's almost like the first thing that comes to mind, the first thing that comes to his mind when he wants to say something, perhaps take a step back and then think again.
Exactly.
But obviously, luckily that we have you on the show with us tonight, Ben. But from a journalist perspective, is this, on the question of obviously what's been going on that subject in particular, is this something that perhaps yourself and other journalists will be intrigued to get the thoughts of other drivers, not just pointing the question to Lewis? Because I've seen a lot on social media, and I don't think it's a fair reflection of the great work that you guys all do, but it does seem sometimes that certain questions of this nature are directed specifically at Lewis and those close to him, and then there'll be other questions that will be more whimsical or more informal to some of the other drivers when these sorts of things happen.
Yeah, the F1 press conference has changed over the years. It used to be a face-to-face thing where you would be able to be more comfortable, build a relationship with a driver, ask all matter of questions to satisfy whichever outlet you had. And you would always go to the drivers that you'd feel most comfortable or that the question relates to. Now it's broadcast on TV. It's become an entertainment event rather than a journalist event and not a news gathering exercise. It's now for TV. So I think people watch that and they assume that we're going to ask the questions to spark the debate, to get the juicy quotes, to massage egos, to do things which they expect us to do or want to see. So I think the role of the press conferences has changed in the public's eyes, or perhaps it's just different from what the public expected. So yes, I take your point with regards to same sort of questions asked at Lewis and Sebastian. Quite well, they're not asked of Fernando. I don't know, given the fact he's the same age and same experience, or older in that case. I'm not too sure. I think that the British Grand Prix will be an interesting one. It will be interesting to see the sort of reaction that we get to this news. I look forward to that press conference, which will now be back on Thursday. So they've actually changed the date. So I think there's 10 drivers in front of the screen. So you'll see 10, and then the other 10 will be exclusively for the written media. So you won't actually get to see that, I don't think. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, certainly will be interesting, that's for sure. Guys, of course, let us know your thoughts on this subject. Now, I do appreciate that it is a sensitive one, so of course a lot of people may be affected by this more so than others, but please do feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. Let us know what you think of what's been going on. Hopefully, the FIA and F1 will take note and follow the advice of Sir Lewis and of course a few other people as well, that action does need to be taken on this, because I don't know about you guys, I'm getting tired of seeing these stories and seeing people getting abused in this regard. It's just wrong, you know, and this is coming from someone that absolutely has no clue or understanding about what it's like to be racially abused, and I'm certainly not the person that should be trying to tell other people about how to feel about it. So please do let me know your thoughts in the comments if you can. Now, of course, guys, we should move on to talk about the British Grand Prix weekend, the main event this weekend. And Ben, last time that we had you on the show, it was the Australian Grand Prix, and there was a big temptation, admittedly from me, the Ferrari fan, that this championship did seem like it was Charles Leclerc's and Ferrari's to lose. Fast forward since that race, Red Bull have won 6 on the spin, Max Verstappen 5 in particular, and all of a sudden it does seem to be his championship to lose. Now, not that I'd be tempted to tempt fate here, but can anybody really stop Max Verstappen and Red Bull this weekend from making it 7 out of 7?
I think that we can. I think that if I rewind back to then, I remember people asking me around that time, will Mercedes win a race this season? And I said, British Grand Prix for me is the one where they would have a chance, I think, from that point onwards. And I think that I saw enough in Canada to stick with that. I don't think they're good enough for pole, but I think they're still quite good for a win. That's what I'm going to go with. I think a lot can change. Max is absolutely running away with it at the moment, but there's also the question of reliability. We saw Sergio Perez have problems. Max obviously had 2 DNFs himself. So all it takes is for a little bit of that to swing around in the other way, and Max starts having the problems, and Mercedes luck into a design, or even Ferrari come good again. And I think that we could see it go wide open. It's too early to say yet. I think that I'm being optimistic in saying that I think that other teams will be in this before the end of the year.
Yeah, very much so. And it does seem right now that we are kind of hoping that something does happen to try and make something out of this championship right now, because there is a worrying feeling from others that maybe not so much from Red Bull, but they seem to be well in control of both championships right now, for lack of a better way of putting it. Courtney, your thoughts on Max Verstappen so far this season? Now, of course, he started the season with some reliability issues. The driving was good, but it did seem that he was in a real fight with Charles Leclerc, and the Ferrari driver did seem to have the advantage at the time. Fast forward from the Australian Grand Prix, Max Verstappen has scored, I think I remember reading 151 points out of the 164 available, which is incredible by any stretch of the imagination right now. So in your mind, what has been key to that form from Max Verstappen? And, you know, are we seeing a different driver in Max Verstappen? Is he driving differently owing to this world title, or are there other factors at play?
Yeah, I think it's been a well-known thing that's been said about Max this year, that obviously when he's actually been able to complete races, he's got pretty much, the best out of the car and the best possible results. I think the only race where we saw a real blip from Max was in Monaco. He wasn't really at the races then. Until we took the lead in Baku, I don't think he had the best weekend there either. I think obviously Charles Leclerc going out obviously made matters easier for him in Baku. But yeah, certainly I think the Max Red Bull combination this season is going very well. I think we haven't seen Max be challenged enough wheel to wheel like we did last season with Lewis Hamilton to really make that concrete judgment that we're seeing a different Max Verstappen. He's certainly making the most of the circumstances that he's in, but I do still feel that Max Verstappen has some polishing and improvement to do when it comes to his racecraft and his aggression at times.
And that's a really interesting point. And I want to get both of your thoughts on this, because I was doing a bit of digging on social media about this. I was quite curious to see what people were thinking in regard to this particular topic with Max Verstappen. Has winning the world title, albeit the manner that it happened, changed the way that he approaches these situations? And someone made a really, really good point. I think it was Richard Spanners Ready from Missed Apex podcast, of course, been on this show before. And he mentioned that one of the biggest factors that I don't think a lot of people have drawn attention to as to why Max Verstappen has changed the way that he drives compared to how he was last season, particularly the tail end when he was fighting Lewis Hamilton, was the fact that whereas before, if we cast our minds back to Brazil at turn 4, when he ran Lewis off the road to defend against him, he can't do that now. Because before, the stewards didn't punish him for it, whereas this season, they most certainly would punish him for it. And I feel like that's an interesting point. I feel like perhaps Max is aware of this, knows where the limits are because they've been established for him, and now can no longer push them, or at least he can push them as far as he can. So, Ben, what are your thoughts on that? Do you feel that the biggest change in Max's driving is the fact that he knows that where the boundaries are and he can only push them so far now, whereas last year they seemed to get away with that a bit more?
Yeah, I think possibly. There is a little bit of this... they're still getting used to these new stewards and their decision-making process. Maybe that's the case. I think the biggest change for me that I've seen is a little bit more confidence. I think that now he's got the one title, I think that he's a bit more relaxed and more confident as an individual. I don't think there's too much to say apart from that, really.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, I suppose we can only really judge this for sure once he's got a competitor alongside him. Now, of course, we all hope that will probably most likely be Charles Leclerc at the moment. We might see Mercedes in the mix too this weekend or at some point, but it's obviously hard to judge that for sure until we actually get that regular competition that we were hoping for. Courtney, what are your thoughts on this topic as well? Would you agree with the statements that obviously I've made and what Ben has made as well, or do you feel that it's more about Max maturing and, learning to drive a bit better and deal with these situations better than he did last year?
I think all the points we made have come into play. I think last season, I think the way things went, things started to become very heated, very personal. I think I'd say it's probably one of the most heated seasons that I've seen as an F1 fan since Lewis against Alonso in 2007. It was uncomfortable. I'd say that last season was probably the most uncomfortable for me to experience as a fan, actually. I think F1 took a turn, particularly within the fan base, in a way that I never thought I'd see, and I don't want to see it happen again. So obviously that would have had some impact on Max's driving. This season seems to be a lot more calm. We're seeing some remarks saying that, it's going to be different this year with Leclerc, as sort of more indirect digs at Lewis Hamilton, trying to make it seem that Lewis is the issue, when I feel that some of the moves that Max, I say last season, most of the bad decisions and controversial decisions in the wheel-to-wheel racing actually came from Max. So hopefully he has learned from that. But I'm still not convinced that until we see Max come against the likes of, Lewis Hamilton and George Russell again, hopefully towards the end of the season, then we'll really get to see if Max has changed.
Yeah, very much so. Just a quick quick note on Checo Perez. Ben, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this one with him, because a couple of races ago in Monaco, after he won that race and the new contract was announced as a result of it, there were a lot of people that were quite hoping that we may get to see an inter-team battle at Red Bull for this championship. Yeah. As it stands from what we've seen in the few races since, it seems to me that the hierarchy is still very much intact, whereas it's Max that's going to spearhead this attack for Red Bull, and Checo is going to play the number 2, the Barrichello role, the Bottas role, if you like. Do you agree with those sentiments, or do you feel that there's still some life in this championship for Checo?
No, I absolutely agree with you. I think that I was one of those people hoping to see a two-way fight between the team. I think that was more optimism than anything else. I think Checo's got the ability to take it to Max, but I just don't know if he will be allowed that opportunity, which is what we're seeing. So I think we're being denied a good team battle there by team orders. Understand Red Bull want to win the championships, or both championships, and the way they do that is by managing the two of them. I don't think it's the same sort of scenarios we had with Sebastian and Mark Webber, where you had two drivers who really didn't like each other. I think these two guys sort of get on. I think Checo understands his position within the team. But I would just like to see that all kick off. I think it'd be great for me from a story point of view. And I think that's what the fans would like to see, two drivers going for it in the same team. It'd be great. It's got to liven up this championship if it's just going to be Red Bull wins from now on in.
Oh, absolutely. I would love to, at the very least, if that's what we're going to get. You want a Mercedes 2016 sort of season. You want to see that inter-team battle go all the way. If we're going to get two drivers from the same team, that's what we want. But in your mind this season, obviously, the fact that we're talking about Checo potentially being in the championship race, albeit we know it's probably not likely at all unless something crazy happens, is a testament to how well Checo has driven this year and the improvements that he's made, particularly with these new cars, in a team that has in the past been very unforgiving of drivers that have not been able to pull their weight for one reason or another. In your mind, what is the biggest reason why Checo has suddenly now become the ideal number 2 driver that Red Bull have been wanting since probably Mark Webber?
Well, it's the consistency. It's the low friction and consistency. It's the perfect Bottas scenario, if you like. Low friction with his teammate, doesn't really cause many problems. Very easy going, does what he's told. It's hassle free, but he's also consistent. He's there to pick up the points, assuming he finishes the race. Qualifying was always a bit of a problem for him, but his racecraft has always been pretty good. He's improved qualifying now, and his racecraft remains good. So, it's just a steady Eddie. He's there sweeping up the points and doing enough. That's really where he's at.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. Let's move on to Ferrari. Now, this is a big weekend for them. And Courtney, you and I have been saying this for the last few weeks now, that Ferrari absolutely have to win. And time again, they come up short for different reasons. We can offer them the caveat with Canada because of Leclerc's engine penalties. But again, that's kind of a direct result of the reliability issues that they've had. And obviously future-proofing themselves from further penalties down the line with the new 2 power units that they had to take. So I'm curious, Ben, to get your thoughts on Ferrari since we last spoke about this. Obviously, their championship and Leclerc's has gone completely to the wayside in contrast to Max Verstappen. It's imploded by standards that even Ferrari probably didn't anticipate by their past standards. And we're going to a circuit now that Ferrari historically haven't always been so great in recent years. The last time they won here was 2018 under Sebastian Vettel. Very nearly won last year with Charles Leclerc, put together a brilliant drive if it wasn't for Lewis's incredible recovery following that first lap incident with Verstappen and the penalty that followed. So, in your mind, what chances do you have for Ferrari to get the result this weekend? Is this going to be the weekend where they're going to get their championship back on track?
I hope so. It'd be good to see, wouldn't it? But then I would also like to see Mercedes back in it as well. So I don't know. They do seem to be shooting themselves in the foot when it comes to reliability and also strategic decisions. 2 things which aren't great if you want to be fighting for titles. I do feel for Charles. I think that he's been let down badly by the team over the last couple of races, and obviously taking these new engines incurs grid penalties and probably a couple more coming as well before the end of the year. So he does seem a little bit hamstrung, and that's disappointing after the great start that they had. That car really is quick, but they just keep having failures and making bad decisions.
Yeah, Christian Horner was alluding to this, and he was talking about the upgrade package that he was expecting Ferrari to bring, one of which, of course, was the new lower drag, more efficient rear wing that Charles Leclerc ran in Canada, which should give him a bit more straight line speed. And that's going to serve him well at Silverstone. And Christian Horner was saying that he felt Ferrari are going to have the best package here, assuming that it's reliable. Do you agree with that, or do you feel that Ferrari's issues are more than just reliability? Because we're talking about a team right now that actually hasn't made a clean pass on a Red Bull yet, with the exclusion of re-overtaking Verstappen in Bahrain when Leclerc was having that battle with him.
Yeah, I think Christian's very good at talking up other teams. I think his game is to take the focus off his team and put it on everyone else. So I wouldn't read too much into that. I think that Ferrari do need to improve reliability, strategic decisions. I also think Carlos Sainz needs to step up as well. I think that's been one of their Achilles heels, the fact that he hasn't been there to pick up the pieces in the same way that Perez has.
Yeah, and Courtney, what are your thoughts on this as well? Because Carlos Sainz, as Ben's rightly mentioned, obviously by his own admission, has not been good enough this season. He had a better weekend in Canada, but one thing I was hearing, particularly towards the end of the race, was that despite the fact that Carlos Sainz couldn't get past Max Verstappen, a lot of people saying if that was Charles Leclerc, maybe he would have done.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I think that Charles Leclerc just has that. He has that extra talent in those kind of moments, in those close battles with the likes of Max Verstappen, and you do get the feeling that he probably would have got the overtake on Max Verstappen, but that has to give Ferrari fans in particular encouragement. If Carlos Sainz was able to get that close to Max Verstappen, particularly in that final stint after the safety car, that could bode well for future races. And let's be honest, as neutral fans, we're hoping that Ferrari do take it to Red Bull, because if they don't, after all the hype that we've had for the 2022 regulations, we could be in for a boring second end to the season. But again, as Ben said, I think for me, for more reasons than one, I think particularly after what we've seen, with the Nelson Piquet stuff, I really, really do hope that Mercedes have really found these upgrades to have a race-winning car, because I think it would make a lot of us very, very happy.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I think we do need Mercedes in the fight, and I think it's a good opportunity to move on to Mercedes now. And I mean, let's be honest, Mercedes, one thing they can be really happy about this season, particularly with George Russell, is the fact that they've managed to maximise every opportunity that has been handed to them in the races. And particularly with George Russell, I mean, he's not finished outside the top 5 in any of the races so far this season. He's got 3 podiums to his name. No other driver can boast that level of consistency, with perhaps the exception of Max Verstappen, owing to, minus the reliability problems he had early in the season. But right now, despite the fact that some people may say outright that Mercedes, even with these rumoured upgrades that they're bringing, which might bring them a bit closer to Ferrari and Red Bull, and on a circuit that they're usually have a happy hunting ground there, and might be a bit more, more comfortable for their car in terms of the ride quality and getting out, extracting the performance out of it, it does feel right now that they could be in a position where if something doesn't go quite right for the top 2 teams, they could be there to pick up an unlikely victory at Silverstone. Ben, obviously, you've spoken about this already, but I want to kind of dig into the nuances behind this. What makes you feel confident, in particular with Mercedes, that they could have a package that might be good enough to win this weekend?
I think that what we saw in Canada is reason to feel optimistic. I think also what we saw in Barcelona as well, with Lewis going from 19th on the first lap to eventually finishing 5th. Could have been 4th, but he obviously had a little bit of reliability. He needed to slow down, and he was passed for 5th. But I think there's enough there to give hope. It is a track they know inside and out. I think it was no coincidence that Barcelona was one where they performed well, a track that every F1 team knows so well. Lewis knows it so well as well, and obviously George as well has driven there plenty of times. Silverstone's another one. I think that they've got so much data, so much understanding, that I think that there's an ability for them to start on the front foot rather than playing the guessing game with regards to the setup. So I think, there's half a chance. As I said, I don't think pole's on, but I think that a race win is on, providing it all comes good for them.
Yeah, I think so too. I think, whilst the ultimate pace is not quite there yet, I definitely feel there's reason to be encouraged by what they're doing. And of course, we shouldn't ignore how good Ferrari and Red Bull have been with their cars as well. But I think there is a sense of inevitability with Mercedes that at some point they're going to get this right. It feels like it may be a while longer than we expect, but at some point they will do. But I want to get your thoughts on George Russell as well, Ben. Obviously, I talked about him earlier. His consistency has been incredible. Is this a surprise that he's driving so well this season, or is it something that, like some other people felt, well, he just needed the car underneath him and now he's delivering the results that we kind of expected of him?
Yeah, I don't think it is a surprise. If you look at his karting career, if you look at his, his racing career in single-seaters, you see him winning the F4 championship. He won GP3, then won GP2. It was no surprise to see him do so well at Mercedes. I think that those 3 years, it was 3 years at Williams. I think it was 3 years, wasn't it?
It was 3 years, yeah.
3 years at Williams served him well because he got the experience, but he was also under the radar. And I think that allowed him to, make mistakes, but also learn the tracks and everything else that goes with coming into F1. I think had he got into a top team at the time, he could have been burnt and we could have lost him somewhere along the way. But the fact he started at the bottom and sort of served his time there was a good thing. And of course, Mercedes is now reaping the benefits from it. I think he's doing fantastically well. Performances have not always got noted, partly because it's been overshadowed by other events in the race. But he's doing great. Most consistent driver out there, as you say, the only one to finish in the top 5 in the opening 9 races. So he just needs to keep it going, keep his head down, and let's see where he is at the end of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. And Courtney, on the subject of Sir Lewis Hamilton, of course, we talked about him a little bit earlier under more difficult circumstances than we see at the British Grand Prix, hopefully. But what did you make of Lewis's performance, particularly towards the end of the Canadian Grand Prix? It seemed a lot more encouraging than what we've seen from him this season, where he's often struggled with the experimentation of the setup, the porpoising issues that's affected him a lot, and in some regards, perhaps not feeling 100% himself at times. Do you feel that what we saw in Canada is a good barometer of what we can expect from him at Silverstone this weekend?
Yeah, that certainly was more of the like the Lewis Hamilton of old, and I'm glad that the evidence is coming out that Lewis was experimenting more with a setup. I've stated it a couple of times on this podcast that you had the typical people saying Lewis is a finished driver, he's past his best, but he has been taking the pain in order to find the answers, because there is still a sense of belief that Mercedes that they can find the answers to what has been slowing the car down, and they're hoping to develop a race-winning car. And I feel that Lewis in particular has been willing to take the pain in order to find those answers. And I think it's those kind of decisions from Lewis that have made him the multiple world champion that he is. And I'm just hoping now that if Mercedes continue to make these improvements, we can be seeing Lewis challenging the likes of, Max and Charles Leclerc. We haven't actually seen too many battles between Lewis and Charles Leclerc. We saw, obviously, famously at Monza a couple of years ago, Silverstone last year. But it'd be great to see Lewis battle with the likes of Charles Leclerc. And obviously, if Mercedes produce a race-winning car on a more regular basis, particularly next season, it'd be exciting to see how Lewis and George Russell, how the dynamic, whether that would change. I just feel you want to be seeing the best drivers coming up against each other. So I'm hoping with the regulations and the other teams catch up with each other, we'll be seeing all the big drivers dicing more in the future.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I think it's important, as you pointed out, Courtney, to note with Sir Lewis, obviously the issues that he's been having with the experimentation. Of course, I think someone mentioned during the F1 coverage last weekend in Canada, or last time out in Canada, that Lewis was experimenting with the setups further, and then it ended up being Mercedes making the decision to let Lewis run with George's setup, like George sharing that information with him, a much more stable, comfortable setup that allowed him to extract that performance and do that something extra that we expect from Lewis Hamilton. Ben, in your mind, if you were Mercedes, would you just find a setup that works for both George and Lewis and just let Lewis run with that? Because it did seem that he was able to get the best out of that car when he was running a much more comfortable setup like George was running.
Yeah, I think that, they split strategies, don't they? So it's putting George on the preferred strategy for out of the box, and then of course it's then giving Lewis the experimental pain, as Courtney was calling it, and sort of dialing in that way to see if they uncover anything else. Let's see what they do at Silverstone. I've got a feeling that they may revert back to pushing in the same direction rather than splitting their strategies. But let's see what happens.
Yeah, very much so. I just want to get your thoughts quickly before we move on to the midfield as a bit of a cluster, as we do on this show now, so that it doesn't drag on forever and ever like it used to. The issue of porpoising. Now, obviously, there's been a lot of back and forth between Toto Wolff and obviously other team bosses, particularly Mattia Binotto and Christian Horner, to name a few. And obviously, we're going to see this new technical directive that the FIA have implemented, TD039 or something like that. And to try and monitor the porpoising and try to manage it and potentially force teams to mitigate that or risk punish them in other ways. There's been a bit of controversy in Canada following a meeting that was had where an agreement was to allow a second floor stay to be put on the cars to kind of mitigate that. And only Mercedes turn up with one, coincidentally, the very next day. And Mattia Binotto made comments alluding to the fact that a senior FIA member, I think it was Charlotte Ann Rao, who used to work at Mercedes and was a former advisor of Toto Wolff, may have had a bit of an influence on this and perhaps helped Mercedes bring a part that, by admission of the other teams, that they couldn't possibly bring. All of that said, what are your thoughts on this? Is this just the same old F1 politics but 2022 version, or do you feel that there could be an element where Toto Wolff in particular is trying to use this porpoising issue to kind of manipulate the regulations in such a way that will allow Mercedes an easier route back to the top? Maybe
a bit of both. I think it is classic politics in F1. It never seems to escape after all these years of Ferrari and doing what they do, and Red Bull doing what they do, and Mercedes doing what they do. There's always nitpicking and name calling with regards to who's a cheat and who's not. So I think it's just the latest installment. Mercedes say that they rustled up something in the garage with bits and pieces they had already in the garage. Whether you believe that or not is up to you. I think the proof in the pudding is the fact that they removed those second stays off the floor anyway. So they clearly weren't doing the job. So yeah, it's a strange one. I don't enjoy all the technical arguing. It's not my favourite topic, if I'm honest. But yeah, let's see what happens at Silverstone. The other element that we forgot to mention was the bling ban, which obviously also comes into play at Silverstone. That's kind of slipped under the radar as well. So let's see what the FIA do with regards to floors and nose studs, two very, very opposite ends of the spectrum, but equally important.
And do you know what? That says it all, because I completely forgot about that second bit. I forgot about the jewelry ban. How could I forget after all the attention it's received this year? I mean,
because we're all bored to tears with it. That's why.
Well, I mean, fair play to the first journalist that goes up to Sir Lewis Hamilton and asks him about that after the week he's had and everything else that's obviously that he'd much rather talk about and discuss than, are you going to wear a note? He might have forgot himself and someone have to remind him on the grid. You've got to take that out before you get going, Lewis. But yeah, that's certainly going to be an interesting one to watch, that one. I certainly recommend it for anyone who's interested in watching the F1 press conferences this weekend. So best of luck on that one, Ben. But on the subject of the midfield now, and before we get to the midfield, I do want to ask one thing, because obviously with porpoising, before I forget, there's been that debate back and forth over, is it down to the teams to kind of mitigate this and give their drivers a more comfortable ride by conceding performance, or is it something the FIA should get involved in a mandate owing to these situations? Where's your head at with this one? Because one way or the other, really, there's no wrong answer, but it's quite a debate going on over it.
Yeah, I think it's up to the teams. That's where I sit on this. I think the teams, if their drivers are complaining that much and it is that uncomfortable and that unsafe, then it's up to the teams to make changes to the car. And if they think it's unsafe and they can't make changes to the car, then they shouldn't run the car.
Yeah, Very much so. I mean, this is the point that I made a couple of weeks ago, and I still stick with that. I think that, whilst the FA can try and get involved in this and introduce a new technical directive or what they want to do with this, I feel like this is an inherent issue of these new rules, and teams just have to deal with it or find ways to mitigate it themselves. But there you go. It starts getting messy otherwise. Talking about the midfield now. Now, obviously, it's quite tightly compact, and we do seem to have newer teams emerging as the front runners and other teams falling back from race to race right now, which is good. It's something that we had last year in 2021. We kept that in 2022, although we'd like to see them a bit closer to the leading teams than they have been. But of course, different stories throughout wherever you go. Alpine looked really, really good in Canada. Ocon was obviously really good, did a great job holding Charles Leclerc back. Alonso, obviously, if it weren't for his reliability issues, may have had a more favourable finish. The Alfa Romeo surprised everybody. Bottas on the same strategy as Leclerc ended up finishing P7, which I thought was an incredible effort. Zhou Guan Yu did a great job in P8 as well. The Aston Martin, Stroll got in the points. Vettel could have done a bit better, but was just a bit unfortunate as well. McLaren surprisingly struggling of late. The AlphaTauris, good 1 week, bad another one. Obviously, Tsunoda making that silly error. And then, of course, you've got Haas that seem to be falling back a bit further and further week by week with no sign of any upgrades. And Williams, Albon doing great, Latifi being Latifi right now. So with all that sort of summarised, hopefully I haven't missed anybody out, Ben. If I could ask for two people in particular, or two drivers in particular, that you are expecting to have a strong weekend or a bad one, whichever way you want to describe it, who do you think that will be? Who are the ones to watch out for in the midfield?
Yeah, I think Gasly's performing very well, isn't he? Mr. Consistent. We talk about George getting in those top 5 places. I think Pierre Gasly's a fantastic driver, been rewarded with a new contract at AlphaTauri. Whether he wants to stay there or not is another thing, but he's got the contract, which obviously give him some security, hopefully some confidence. So I think, let's see a good weekend from him. I would like to see a stronger weekend from Vettel. But if you're asking me just to pick two, then I think I'll go with Alonso. I think that he's got the bit between his teeth. I think he was frustrated in Canada. Obviously, the weaving on the straight gets the penalty, which bumps him back to 9th. But I think he could come good. I think if Alpine get it right, then they will be quick at Silverstone. And if they are indeed, he could be in the mix.
Yeah, I mean, the Miami penalty for Alonso was a bit harsh under the circumstances. This one seemed more of a slam dunk fair cop. You can't be doing that, especially this season. Last season, you probably would have got away with it. Definitely not this season. Yeah. It's an important thing to mention with Gasly as well. Obviously, that deal it is announced now at the time of recording this. I know last week we talked about this. To me, it kind of feels like a bit of a place maker for him. Like he's staying with the team for 2023. I don't feel like they have plans for him at Red Bull. But I don't feel that they want to lose him from F1. I feel like they're just having him around for another year because more seats might present themselves in 2024. It's kind of one of those, we'll just do you a favour, keep you around. You're still going to do a job for us. Obviously, the Yuri Vips incident kind of made it all the more easier for them to make that decision. But what are your thoughts on that one, Ben? Do you feel that there is any route for Pierre Gasly to stay with the AlphaTauri team beyond his new contract, or do you feel it's just one to keep him around so that he'll find a seat somewhere in 2024?
No, I think there's potential for him to stay if he's happy. I mean, he is a team leader there. He is still in F1. I mean, I think that you look around and he's seen plenty of drivers come into F1 and leave F1. He's still hanging in there. Perhaps it's also an investment opportunity for Red Bull. The way that they see it is that if something happens with Vettel, Alonso, Hamilton, or any other driver, if there's, a vacancy at one of the big teams, if they come looking, I think that someone like Gasly would be high on one of those teams' wish list. And of course, if he's under contract, then he comes at a price. So it might be the case that they sign him up to this contract and keep it with a view of selling him later on should they need to. If not, then obviously he's doing a solid job. They also haven't got anyone to step in at the moment anyway, apart from, you could say Alex Albon, but I'm not sure what the terms are with that agreement with Williams. So, it made perfect sense just to sign him up. He wasn't going anywhere. So that, it made sense to put him onto a new contract.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we don't talk about F1 transfers in the same way that we do with football, for example. So that's something that might be worth considering. Might get a bit of money out of it. Certainly, why not? He's a good driver. And obviously, if someone else is going to take him from them, they might as well make some money from it. Courtney, what are your thoughts on the two drivers to look out for this weekend? And as I said, it could be good, it could be bad. Who are you recommending we keep an eye on?
Obviously, I'm going to say Lando Norris. I think Lando Norris is due a great result. Obviously, the form from McLaren in particular hasn't been great. I think a lot of the issues that Lando had in Canada were completely out of his control. And we know that if Lando is given the car, he always churns in good results. And obviously, he'll be up for it being his home race. And I completely agree with you, Ben, about Fernando Alonso. I feel it's only a matter of time with not only Alpine's upturning form, but with Fernando Alonso's personal form. I think it's only a matter of time before he gets a big result. I think, a podium, I'm not saying it'd be at Silverstone, but I think a podium in a messy race is certainly on the cards for Fernando. So I do feel there's a sense of inevitability with that.
Yeah, very true. I kind of want to open the forum a little bit about Lando Norris here, because it's quite hard to kind of judge right now where he's at with things at McLaren, because McLaren, obviously, they've kind of gone down a little bit in the pecking order. They seem to make a rise up. I think as early as Imola and Barcelona, they were potentially challenging Mercedes. And since then, after Monaco, they've kind of fallen to the wayside a little bit. Ricciardo's picked up his game a little bit, which I think is quite good compared to his teammate. But with all that being said, how do we feel about Lando Norris right now? Is he still, I know he's been having issues with the car, but is he still driving to that same level as he was earlier this season and how he was last season? Or do we feel that perhaps maybe he needs to step his game up a little bit? Because it's kind of hard to tell right now.
I don't think we know, do we? It's difficult to see in that car. Let's remember back at pre-season testing, I think in Barcelona it looked good, but then in Bahrain it was an absolute dog. And Bahrain, the first race, it was rubbish. In Saudi, it was rubbish. All the comments from Lando at the time were, look, this car's an absolute mess. And then they seemed to pick it up very quickly, and everything was like, oh, maybe it's not so bad. But, I think inherently that car isn't as good as what they had hoped. And obviously they're struggling. And I think that Ricciardo's form's come back. That's a case of confidence and sort of regaining confidence in the car. With regards to Lando, I just don't think we've got a barometer yet with regards to just how difficult this car is. It kind of peaks and troughs. So, I think jury's out at the moment for me. I think that he is doing a solid job. Is it as good as he was driving last year? I don't know, but then he might not have confidence in the car like he had last year.
Yeah, very much so. And it's such a smooth ride from the looks of it. I mean, I know McLaren say they're having porpoising issues, but overall it has looked the best ride quality of anybody. Red Bull to a degree might challenge, but even still, McLaren does look pretty smooth all the way around, but just not extracting the performance at every circuit. And there doesn't seem to be a reason or a pattern as to why. I mean, we thought it might be sensitive to hot climates, but then Canada... all right, it can be hot sometimes, but I've seen hotter circuits, and it was well, there you go. So, you would know, you were there. So,
I was.
There you go. So, I mean, McLaren, it's a strange one. Courtney, I know for the benefit of people that are listening to this on podcasting platforms, you were nodding to a lot of what Ben was saying there. I'm guessing you probably agree to that testament of what Lando's been doing so far.
Yeah, I think particularly in recent races, I feel that McLaren had sort of been in no man's land. I think sometimes we barely see McLaren in the coverage at all. We just sort of judging them by their results. It just seems to that they're going through quite a messy patch. But I'm glad you mentioned about Ricciardo. I think we have seen an upturn in form in what probably is one of the most important phases of his career. Because if he was continuing on that sort of the bad form we've been seeing, we could have lost him altogether. And I think most of us F1 fans would have missed him. So let's hope that he continues getting his form back, because we know he can be a good driver.
Yeah, I mean, whilst at the moment it's very much in his control over his McLaren future rather than the other way around, at least for this year, it's certainly not doing him any harm beating his teammate or being at least on par with his teammate right now, who obviously McLaren think very, very highly of. Before we go to the final parts of this episode, I do want to talk briefly about Haas. Now, Haas at the start of the season, the return of K-Mag, obviously the stories of the fallout with Ural Kali and Nikita Mazepin as a result of the Ukraine-Russia conflict. It quickly went from a nightmare to a dream come true with Magnussen getting some big points on his return to F1 in Bahrain. Gunther Steiner joking that if he had him longer in the car, he might have got a podium or even won that race. And of course, some big opportunities in a few races after that. Since then, it's kind of slowly faded and fallen to the wayside. We saw some great performances from Magnussen and Mick Schumacher in qualifying in Canada, but of course that fizzled out. Reliability issues, crashes, lack of investment opportunities for them to develop this car further. Now we're hearing it could be Hungary before they actually have a significant upgrade on the car, by which time everybody else has already stolen the march. Even Williams are bringing upgrades this weekend, which could be quite telling. Have we already experienced the peak of Haas this season? And if not, what are the chances, or how likely is it that they can get back into those positions where they can score points right now? Because it seems everything seems to be going wrong for them at the moment. What are your thoughts on this, Ben?
Yeah, I think they've been unlucky. I think, Saturday night in Montreal, they were super happy. It was such a great qualifying result, and contrast that to Sunday, it was very disappointing. Maybe we're seeing a situation now where the money is missing, and it's around this sort of time where they would be developing and throwing more money around and bringing new parts. Maybe that is the issue. Maybe that's what's happened. They spent, let's remember, last year they spent all their time building this 2022 car, and it was the most overly developed car going into that first race in Bahrain. Now everyone else has had time to catch up. They're all pretty much pretty much where they were at the start of the year. So that's the difficult thing. It's sad to see. I want to see them doing well, and I was really happy that they did well on the Saturday. But of course, Sunday was a different story. So let's see how they go at Silverstone. Fingers crossed that they'll do all right. But I think for me, it's difficult to see past the struggles at the moment. I don't know when things are going to turn around in terms of updates. You mentioned Budapest. I hope that's the case, or if not before, because like you say, it could be too late.
Yeah, and if it's not crashes or development issues, it's reliability. I mean, both Magnussen and Schumacher at times in recent races were running in the points owing to the Ferrari power units or issues with them sort of letting them down, which is something that they would not have anticipated. And it's certainly not boding well for them. Courtney, what are your thoughts on this one with Haas? Do you see any light at the end of the tunnel for them, or are we just has it already peaked for them in 2022?
Yeah, I kind of got a feeling that they're going to be sort of slipping back through the pecking order. I think the only thing I hope for is Mick Schumacher gets a chance to showcase his talent, because he was very unlucky in Canada, and I do feel that Mick Schumacher is one of those drivers that is running out of time. I was talking about Daniel Ricciardo having a chance to show what he can do. I think Mick Schumacher needs a good result. I think he needs a decent points finish for Haas, because he's been getting outclassed by Kevin Magnussen. He seemed to be a lot closer in Canada. I think the most important for him is that he continues to perform at that level, because I do feel he's in a bit of trouble at the moment.
Yeah, very much so. Before we move on to the predictions, and Ben, of course, you wouldn't be surprised to hear that my most common bold prediction of the season has been Mick Schumacher getting in the points. At some point, I'm going to be bound to be right at some point. I'm just going to keep trying, but we'll see. But before we get into the predictions, news that we kind of are expecting to be announced at some point. Some people have been going as far as saying it could be announced at the British Grand Prix, by which time of recording we haven't had confirmed yet. Oscar Piastri getting his seat in F1 looks very likely now. It's going to be at Williams, replacing Nicholas Latifi. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I did the story about it. The fact that his days look numbered. I think that Dalton, who are obviously Williams owners, I think that they're seeing the bigger picture now. They don't necessarily need the Latifi money, and it's time to bring in a driver who can consistently score points and lead that team forward. I think that's what they're missing. Latifi, lovely bloke, but just can't deliver in the same way that others can. I think you only need to look at Nick de Vries jumping in that car in Barcelona in FP1 and setting a quicker time than Latifi has been in it for an eternity. So that for me just tells you that all you need to know, and that it's the driver. He probably needs to go. Maybe go and do another series. I don't know what he's going to do, but for Williams, if I was in charge, I'd be looking elsewhere. I don't think it's going to be for this weekend. Yes, Capito said that it was for the season, that he's going to remain there, but let's see. So, some things change, I reckon.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not expecting a driver change at all until next season. I think some people may have thought it could happen, but I'm expecting more an announcement, and obviously, you know, the sooner they can do it, I suppose, probably the easier the transition. It's not like they're going to lose much, I suppose, with Latifi knowing that his days are numbered. It's not like a Ferrari Kimi Raikkonen situation in 2018 at Monza when they told him beforehand that Leclerc was taking his seat when he was on pole position. Bit stupid thing to do. I don't think Williams are at risk of repeating that, but it was quite interesting. Latifi did have some interesting comments about the Williams, saying that the car was just poor, it wasn't really working for him properly. I thought there was a sense of irony about it, particularly when he was saying it in Canada, because I thought, well, you know, Albon seems to be doing all right with it. Maybe you need to be doing more about it. But obviously, Courtney, you and I have spoken a lot about Oscar Piastri. Ben, I'm interested to get your thoughts on Oscar Piastri. I mean, is this the right move for him? And more importantly, what are you expecting from him?
Yeah, I think that any driver that spends time on the sidelines is bad news. I think that, you know, you win that GP2 F2 championship, and I think that automatically you should go into F1. I think if you have this time where you're without a seat, you lose some of that edge. I think you lose some of that competitiveness. So I think, you know, ideally you would win the GP2 championship, F2 championship, whatever it's going to be called, and then you go into F1. You know, that's what I'd like to see. So I was disappointed that there wasn't a seat for him. For me, he's the obvious choice to go there, unless they go for Nick de Vries, unless they go for Stoffel. I don't want them to go for Hulkenberg. You know, I think that they've got to go for, you know, probably someone younger. So that probably rules out Stoffel, maybe Nick de Vries as well. So, you know, maybe Oscar Piastri is the right one to go for.
Well, this was it, and obviously you referenced the one of the mandatory 2 tests that William gave to one of their young drivers. They gave to Nick de Vries, and obviously how, you know, he was better than Latifi in the practice session. I mean, Nick de Vries is 27. I mean, that's not old, but it's certainly. I mean, we start getting into the realms of Fernando Alonso doing a young driver test a couple of years back when he was nearly 40. So make of that what you will. Courtney, before we get into the predictions, our favourite part of the episode, of course. Any additional thoughts as to this driver change potentially with Piastri coming in for Latifi?
It's just a pity it didn't happen sooner, in my opinion. I had genuine concerns that Williams as a team were stagnating, and I'm still slightly worried that we could see them fade out of F1. I feel that having some fresh young blood in the team in Oscar Piastri will give some attention to the Williams team, give them a sense of something to look forward to in the future. And I feel that injection, I say, of youth and talent will give the team the boost it really does need right now.
Yeah, I hope so, because it's very much got the makings of like a football club that takes on quite a few loan players, for example, and helps from other clubs to certain degrees that allows them to propel them up. And in Williams, obviously, you've got a great facility. Obviously, Jos Capito very motivated to try and bring this team forward, and obviously saying that Williams do not need that additional investment that a driver like Latifi would provide for them, although to the degree of which they actually did, obviously perhaps in more difficult times, was probably more important than it was now. I don't think we can say that Latifi was on the Stroll level of buying his way into a team, but certainly one nonetheless. And they've got 2 young drivers from 2 separate teams and a technical partnership with Mercedes. So all the ingredients are there. Obviously, how that develops with Alpine and Renault going forward with the Piastri loan, we'll have to wait and see. So hopefully for their sake, it is a new lease of life that Williams could breathe into the team and hopefully come back up the field, because it's certainly where they belong to be. No one wants to see them straggling at the back. Now, let's move on to the bold predictions, our favourite part of the episode. Obviously, Ben, you've been with us before on this one, but just as a casual reminder for those of you that aren't familiar with how this works, I ask our guests to give us a predicted top 3 and also a bold prediction as well. And given it's the British Grand Prix and I'm expecting fireworks, Ben, I'm going to lend the floor to you first as our guest.
Okay.
Who's in your top 3?
Well, my top 3 and prediction may well cover both. So I'm going for Hamilton win.
Wow.
I'm going Hamilton win. I'm going to go. I think Verstappen will be in the top 3. I'm going to go Verstappen win. I'm going to go Leclerc 2 and Verstappen 3.
That's a pretty good prediction. And for some guests who didn't tune in to our Australian Grand Prix prediction, and Ben, you might know where I'm going with this, you made the bold prediction of a double McLaren points finish, which is something they'd got nowhere near at the start of the season. Yeah. And what happened? They both finished in the points very comfortably. So do not write that prediction off.
Lump on a Hamilton win.
Please make it happen.
By all means, go for it, guys. Of course, gamble responsibly, of course. Not that I endorse it, but there you go. That's all, each to their own. Courtney, what are your bold predictions this weekend? Are you going to be equally as bold as Ben, or are you going for a bit more conservative top three?
I'm going to go conservative. Obviously, I'd love to see Lewis and Mercedes bounce back, and particularly after the comments that have been going on, I'd just love to see Lewis throw in the face of his haters this weekend. But I'm going to be conservative. I'm going to say I think Leclerc and Ferrari are going to bounce back because they need to. I'm going to go with a Leclerc win, Verstappen second. I think Mercedes will be closer. I think I can see Lewis getting on the podium. He'll have that extra motivation with it being his home race. And my bold prediction is with the Williams upgrades coming in, I'm going to say Albon in the points.
Not bad. I think that's a pretty good one. I'm going to start with my bold prediction first. And as per usual, Mick Schumacher in the points. No. I'm not going to go with that. No, my bold prediction is it's going to be similar to Ben's one, but I'm going to go a little bit more bold. I'm going for a double Mercedes podium. Hamilton to win, George Russell P3, Max Verstappen P2. As much as I would, and this is the Ferrari.
Right, I hope you're right.
And this is the Ferrari fan.
There's change, and we're going to breathe new life into this championship because, greatest respect to Max Verstappen, we don't want to see him winning it by, September, and we've still got 3 or 4 races or something to go. We don't need that. We don't need that.
No, absolutely right. And of course, before you guys start typing in the comments, oh, here we go, British bias, wanting to back the Mercedes drive. This is the Ferrari fan predicting this. So I think if I think Mercedes are going to get a 1-2, hopefully not. Maybe Ferrari might get in there. We'll see. But if they are going to get a double podium, so be it. And it would be something special for the crowd. The British summer, Lewis Hamilton winning the British Grand, or George Russell. Who knows? Why not? But guys,
Orlando Norris.
Yeah, there you go. Well, there you go. All British podium. Why not? There you go. There's a bold prediction.
Well, do you know when is this going to happen? Because
1, 2, 3. Yeah.
I'm waiting for that day where we actually see the British 1, 2, 3. Maybe next season. Who knows? But I'm waiting for that day.
Yeah, I mean that will be special.
Could be Sunday.
Yeah, could be. Absolutely, guys. I mean, let's see. I've seen stranger things in Formula 1. I think back to Johnny Herbert winning the European Grand Prix back in 1997, and a Stewart 1-2 with Rubens Barrichello. So who knows? And people remember Gasly and Monza as well. Why not? But guys, of course, let us know your thoughts and predictions for this race weekend. Of course, as I mentioned already, let us know all your thoughts on the topics that we have discussed. And of course, if you haven't already, do consider subscribing to the channel. We'd really would appreciate that. And of course, if you follow us on your major favourite podcasting platforms, you can give us a review. A 5-star one would be great. As I mentioned before, you can only give us a review on Apple iTunes, a written one where we can see your name on there. So if you do not listen to us on Apple iTunes and you want to give us a 5-star review, make sure to screenshot it when you do and send it to our socials at DNF1_official, either on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook. Of course, if you do, we'll give you a shout out on the next episode as a thank you for your continued support. Ben, of course, for those who aren't familiar with your work as a journalist, where can they find you for more great articles and content from yourself, sir?
My stuff is at The Sun and my Twitter is at Ben J Hunt.
Great stuff. And of course, thank you for coming on the show once again. And who knows, we could be looking back on this one, the race review, looking like absolute geniuses or absolute fools, both equally plausible. We'll just have to wait and see. But let's be optimistic that we might get an exciting race. I think that's the least that we expect this weekend. But guys, of course, as always, thank you so much for tuning in. Please stay safe and we will see you in the next episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. And remember, if you're not first, you're probably DNF1. Take care.
See you soon.
Recording stopped.
And we're done. Brilliant.